Welcome to Certified Data Engineer Associate DEA-C01 Practice Exam number 12. You'll get 30 exam-style questions. I will read each question, then give you a 10-second countdown to review the answer choices on screen. Feel free to pause the video if you need longer. After each countdown, I will reveal the correct answer and explanation. Question 1. Adatum Corp runs an Amazon EMR cluster processing large-scale Spark jobs. The cluster uses a primary node, 10 core nodes with HDFS, and 20 task nodes. The team wants to reduce costs by using spot instances while ensuring no data loss if instances are terminated. Which node configuration is appropriate? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. In an EMR cluster, the primary node runs the name node and resource manager. Losing it terminates the entire cluster. Core nodes store HDFS data and run tasks. Losing core nodes results in HDFS data loss. Task nodes only run computation tasks and store no HDFS data, making them ideal candidates for spot instances since their termination causes no data loss and tasks can be retried. Using on-demand instances for primary and core nodes ensures cluster stability and data durability, while spot instances on task nodes provide significant cost savings for compute capacity. Using spot instances for primary or core nodes risks cluster termination or data loss. Reserved instances for all nodes do not provide the flexibility of spot pricing and require long-term commitment. Question 2. Northwind Healthcare uses Amazon EventBridge to route events from multiple microservices. A new requirement states that when a patient appointment is created in Amazon SQS, the message must be enriched with patient demographic data from an external API before being sent to an AWS Step Functions workflow. The solution must use the least operational overhead. Which approach should the data engineer use? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. EventBridge pipes provide native point-to-point integration with built-in filtering and enrichment capabilities. By configuring SQS as the source, an API destination for enrichment, and step functions as the target, the entire pipeline is managed without custom code. This is the lowest operational overhead approach because it requires no Lambda functions or custom integration logic. Using an EventBridge rule with Lambda requires writing and maintaining custom Lambda code for API calls and step functions invocation. Polling SQS with Lambda adds additional components and complexity. Placing enrichment inside step functions moves the complexity downstream rather than eliminating it. Question 3. A data engineer at Litware Energy is designing encryption for a multi-account data lake. The central data lake account stores sensitive data in S3 encrypted with KMS. Analytics teams in 3 separate AWS accounts need to read and write objects to specific prefixes. The team discovers that cross-account access fails when using the default AWS/S3 managed KMS key. What should the data engineer do to enable cross-account encrypted access? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Customer-managed KMS keys are required for cross-account KMS access because the key policy can be configured to grant encrypt and decrypt permissions to principals in other AWS accounts. The default AWS/S3 managed key cannot have its key policy modified to allow cross-account access, which is why the current setup fails. Switching to SSCS3 would work for access but loses the audit trail and granular control provided by KMS. Creating separate AWS-managed keys in each account does not solve the problem since data encrypted with one account's key cannot be decrypted by another account. S3 bucket keys reduce KMS API calls but do not change the fundamental cross-account limitation of AWS-managed keys. Question 4. Adatum Insurance has an AWS Glue ETL job processing customer records. The job reads data from multiple S3 paths, applies transformations, and writes to a target S3 location. The data engineer needs to ensure that each S3 source maintains its own independent bookmark state so that reprocessing one source does not affect others. What must the data engineer configure to achieve this? Select 1, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. The transformation CTX parameter in AWS Glue is used to index the bookmark state for each data source independently. By assigning a unique transformation CTX to each S3 source in the Glue script, the job bookmark service tracks the processing state of each source separately. This allows one source to be reprocessed without affecting the bookmark state of other sources. Creating separate Glue jobs for each source adds unnecessary operational overhead and prevents combining data in a single transformation pipeline. S3 event notifications are for triggering actions on new objects, not for tracking bookmark state. IAM roles control permissions, not bookmark state management. Question 5. A data engineer must configure an AWS Glue job that reads from an S3 bucket and writes results to another S3 bucket in the same account. Which approach requires the least configuration effort? Select 1 answer. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. AWS Glue is designed to assume an IAM service role, and creating a role with the appropriate S3 read and write permissions, and associating it with the Glue job is the standard supported approach. The role can be attached with a single managed policy or a custom policy scoped to the specific buckets, and it serves as a centralized permission boundary for all of the job's AWS service interactions. AWS Glue cannot assume IAM user credentials. Users are identity principals for human access, not for service-level assumptions, and assigning user credentials to Glue is architecturally unsupported. S3 ACLs operate at the object and bucket level with a coarse permission model that lacks the granularity needed to specifically authorize a Glue job and requires configuration on every affected object. S3 bucket policies are a valid supplementary mechanism, but require separate policy configurations on both the source and destination buckets, whereas a single IAM role policy attached to the Glue job consolidates all permissions in one place. Question 6. Northwind Ventures operates a data lake on Amazon S3, where data analysts run Athena queries on JSON log files. Monthly Athena costs have exceeded $15,000 due to full table scans on 20 TB of uncompressed JSON data. The data engineer needs to reduce query costs by at least 90% while maintaining query compatibility. Which combination of actions achieves this goal? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option B and option C. Converting JSON to Parquet with compression reduces the data scanned by Athena by 90% or more because Parquet is a columnar format that allows Athena to read only the columns referenced in the query, and snappy compression further reduces file sizes. Partitioning the Parquet data by commonly filtered date columns allows Athena to skip entire partitions that do not match query predicates, further reducing scan data. Together, these optimizations typically achieve 95% plus cost reduction. S3 intelligent tiering reduces storage costs, not Athena query costs, since Athena charges are based on data scanned. Federated queries route to external data sources and do not reduce S3 scanning costs. S3 Select can filter within individual objects but provides far less cost reduction than columnar format conversion and partitioning, and is less effective for complex analytical queries. Question 7. Litware Healthcare has a data pipeline that ingests patient records into Amazon S3. The compliance team requires that all data at rest be encrypted using encryption keys that the organization fully controls, including the ability to immediately revoke access by disabling the key. The solution must support automatic key rotation, which encryption approach should the data engineer implement. Select one, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. SSC KMS with a customer-managed KMS key provides full control over the encryption key lifecycle, including the ability to disable or revoke the key to immediately prevent access to encrypted data. Customer-managed keys support configurable automatic rotation between 90 and 2560 days, and all key usage is logged in AWS CloudTrail for auditing. SSES3 uses AWS-managed keys that the customer cannot control, disable, or audit individually, which does not meet the requirement for full organizational control. SSEC requires the customer to provide and manage encryption keys with each API request and does not support automatic key rotation through AWS. Client-side encryption with AWS-managed KMS keys does not give the organization full control over the key since AWS manages its lifecycle, and disabling an AWS-managed key is not possible. Question 8. A data engineer maintains custom Python scripts used by many Lambda functions. When the scripts are modified, all Lambda functions must be manually updated. Which solution provides a less manual update mechanism? Select one answer. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Lambda layers are versioned archives of additional code and dependencies that can be attached to multiple Lambda functions simultaneously. When the custom Python scripts are updated, publishing a new layer version and updating the layer reference in the function configuration automatically makes the new code available to all attached functions without modifying each function's deployment package individually. If functions are configured to always use the latest layer version, updates propagate automatically across all functions at once. Storing a pointer to scripts in the execution context object or environment variables requires each Lambda function to download and execute the script at runtime, introducing latency, additional S3 API calls, and dynamic code execution patterns that are neither the intended design nor a reduction in manual maintenance. Assigning aliases to Lambda functions controls which function version is invoked by external callers. Aliases do not share code across functions and do not provide a mechanism for propagating shared script updates across multiple function definitions. Question 9. A company plans to migrate its on-premises Apache Hadoop cluster running Spark, HBase, Hudi, and Presto workloads to AWS. Storage scalability is the primary concern. The company wants to continue using existing job scripts at the lowest possible cost. Which solution meets these requirements? Select one answer. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Centralizing data in Amazon S3 provides virtually unlimited scalability and durability without requiring cluster storage management. Transient EMR clusters are created on demand for specific jobs and terminated upon completion, so the company pays only for compute during active processing rather than running a cluster continuously. Existing Hadoop job scripts require minimal or no modification when running on EMR. Expanding core nodes to grow HDFS storage adds significant cost because core nodes must run continuously and combine compute with storage, eliminating the pay-as-you-go advantage. Persistent clusters eliminate the primary cost advantage of using transient clusters, charging continuously even when no jobs are running. Splitting active and archival data across HDFS and S3 requires additional integration logic, complicates data management, and still incurs the cost of keeping core nodes running to maintain HDFS. Question 10. A company needs to replicate a MySQL on-premises database to Amazon S3 to reflect ongoing changes. Which two options satisfy this requirement? Select two. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A and option B. AWS DMS Full Load plus CDC mode first performs a complete bulk migration of all existing data, and then continuously captures and applies row-level changes from the MySQL binary log to the S3 target, ensuring ongoing changes are reflected without gaps. This satisfies both the initial replication and the continuous change tracking requirements. Apache Parquet is a columnar format that provides significantly better compression and query performance than CSV for large datasets stored in S3, reducing storage costs and accelerating downstream analytical workloads. CDC-only mode skips the full load, meaning existing data is never migrated. It only captures changes after the task starts, resulting in an incomplete dataset in S3. CSV is the default DMS output format, but provides inferior storage efficiency and query performance compared to Parquet for analytical use cases. AWS Lambda with daily batch replication cannot continuously reflect changes throughout the day and introduces latency proportional to the batch interval, failing the continuous replication requirement. Question 11. A data engineer needs to process large datasets using Python in a distributed multi-node cluster with the least operational overhead, supporting both batch and real-time processing. Which AWS service is most suitable? Select one answer. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. AWS Glue for Ray is a serverless job type in AWS Glue that uses the open-source Ray framework to distribute Python workloads across a multi-node cluster managed entirely by AWS. It is Python native, supports both batch and streaming data processing, and requires no infrastructure provisioning or cluster management. AWS Glue automatically scales the Ray cluster based on workload. AWS Glue Databrew is a visual no-code data preparation tool that does not support custom Python distribution across nodes. Amazon EMR supports distributed Python workloads, but requires provisioning, configuring, and managing a cluster, adding significant operational overhead. AWS Lambda runs single-function invocations with a maximum 15-minute execution limit and no built-in distributed computing capability across nodes, making it unsuitable for processing large multi-node distributed datasets. Question 12. Adatum Genomics runs Apache Spark jobs on Amazon EMR to process large genomics datasets. The workloads are cost-sensitive and can tolerate occasional task failures. The cluster uses EMRFS to store all processed results in Amazon S3. The data engineer needs to minimize compute costs while maintaining reliable data output. Which node configuration strategy should be applied? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Using on-demand instances for primary and core nodes ensures cluster stability and HDFS data integrity, while spot instances for task nodes provide significant cost savings for compute-intensive processing. Since EMRFS stores results in S3, task node termination only causes recomputation of in-progress tasks without data loss. The primary node controls the cluster, and its termination would shut down the entire cluster. Core nodes store HDFS data, and their loss could cause HDFS data corruption. Task nodes only process data without storing HDFS data, making them ideal for spot instances. Using spot for all nodes risks cluster termination if the primary node is reclaimed. On-demand for all nodes is the most expensive option. Spot for primary and core, but on-demand for task nodes inverts the best practice by protecting the least critical component while exposing critical infrastructure to interruption. Question 13. A data engineer at Northwind Corp is configuring an AWS Glue ETL job to process data stored in a VPC-connected Amazon RDS database and write the output to Amazon S3. The Glue job consistently fails with a network timeout error when attempting to write to S3. The VPC has no Internet Gateway or NAT gateway. Which combination of actions should the data engineer take to resolve the issue? Select two. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are Option A and Option B. AWS Glue jobs running in a VPC require an S3 VPC gateway endpoint with a corresponding route in the VPC route table to access S3 without internet connectivity. The gateway endpoint is free and provides private access to S3 from within the VPC. Additionally, Glue requires a self-referencing security group rule that allows all TCP inbound traffic from itself. This is because Glue workers communicate with each other within the VPC, and without this rule, interworker communication fails. Both configurations are mandatory for Glue jobs accessing VPC resources and writing to S3. Attaching an internet gateway would work but violates the security principle of keeping the VPC private and introduces unnecessary internet exposure. An S3 interface endpoint private link is an alternative to the gateway endpoint but incurs hourly costs per AZ, whereas the gateway endpoint is free. Configuring Glue to use a public subnet is not supported for Glue connections, which require private subnets. Question 14. Litware Healthcare stores patient records in an Amazon S3 data lake. The data is encrypted with SSC KMS using a customer-managed key in account A. A research team in account B needs to read the encrypted data for analysis using Athena. The data engineer has already configured lake formation cross-account permissions. However, the research team receives access denied errors when querying. What additional configuration is required? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is Option D. When S3 data is encrypted with SSC KMS using a customer-managed key, any principal that needs to read the data must have KMS decrypt permission on that key. For cross-account access, the KMS key policy in account A must explicitly grant the consumer account's IAM role permission to decrypt. Without this, lake formation can authorize the data access, but the actual S3 read fails because the consumer cannot decrypt the objects. S3 block public access controls public access and has no effect on cross-account lake formation permissions. While SSCS3 does not have cross-account KMS key issues, switching encryption requires re-encrypting all objects and loses KMS audit trail benefits. A VPC endpoint for KMS improves network routing, but does not grant cross-account decryption permissions, which must be configured in the key policy. Question 15. A Philippines-based company processes international orders from an Amazon SQS queue using an AWS step functions workflow. The workflow should only execute for orders that do not contain the PH country code. Which solution requires the least development effort? Select one answer. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is Option A. Amazon EventBridge Pipes provides a fully managed point-to-point integration between an SQS source and a step functions target with built-in event filtering using anything but or prefix match patterns. Configuring a filter on the country code field ensures only non-PH orders are forwarded to the workflow, preventing unnecessary executions without writing any custom filtering code. An EventBridge rule matching SQS send message API calls does not filter individual message content. The workflow would be invoked for every order, and filtering logic inside step functions would still consume workflow executions for PH orders, wasting cost. A Lambda intermediary achieves the filtering goal but requires writing, deploying, and maintaining a function solely to bridge SQS and step functions, adding development overhead that EventBridge Pipes eliminates. Queue length is not a reliable indicator of order content type and provides no mechanism for filtering by country code. Question 16. Tailspin Logistics uses Amazon EventBridge to orchestrate their data processing pipeline. When a new data file lands in S3, an EventBridge rule triggers an AWS Glue ETL job. The processed output is written to a different S3 bucket, which should trigger a second Glue job for data quality checks. The team wants to ensure that the second job only starts after the first job completes successfully, not when intermediate files are written during processing. Which approach provides the most reliable orchestration? Select 1, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. EventBridge natively captures AWS Glue job state change events, including transitions to succeeded, failed, and stopped states. By creating a rule that matches only the succeeded state for the first Glue job, the second job is reliably triggered only after the first job completes successfully. This provides decoupled, event-driven orchestration without custom code. Configuring S3 event notifications on the output bucket would trigger the second job on every intermediate file write during processing, not just upon successful completion. A Lambda function at the end of the Glue job adds tight coupling between jobs and creates a point of failure if the Lambda invocation fails after the Glue job succeeds. SNS cannot directly start a Glue job as a subscription target without an intermediate Lambda function, adding unnecessary complexity. Question 17. A data engineer designs a serverless pipeline to process streaming JSON data from Kinesis data streams. The data must be converted to a columnar format with a 60-second buffering interval stored in S3 and made queryable via SQL with existing BI tools. Which solution meets all requirements? Select one answer. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Amazon Data Firehose natively supports format conversion from JSON to Apache Parquet using an AWS Glue Data Catalog schema definition, and its buffering interval is configurable from 60 seconds to 900 seconds. This satisfies both the conversion and buffering requirements without custom code. Data is delivered to S3, and the Glue Data Catalog schema makes the Parquet files immediately queryable by Athena using standard SQL. The Athena JDBC connector enables existing BI tools to connect and visualize results. S3 put event-triggered Lambda conversion does not support a configurable buffering interval as part of a streaming ingestion pattern. The 60-second buffering requirement implies a streaming delivery service rather than event-per-object Lambda invocations. S3 event notifications cannot directly invoke Glue jobs. Additionally, loading into RDS moves away from a serverless architecture and adds unnecessary complexity. MSK with Redshift requires managing Kafka cluster infrastructure and a provisioned Redshift cluster, both of which contradict the serverless requirement. Question 18. A data engineer at a Datum Corp is building a data pipeline using AWS Glue. The pipeline reads from a JDBC source, PostgreSQL, that contains 500 million rows. The Glue job must only process new rows added since the last run. The source table has an auto-incrementing id column, which Glue feature should the data engineer use to achieve incremental processing. Select one, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Glue job bookmarks track the state of processed data for JDBC sources by using bookmark key columns that must be monotonically increasing or decreasing, such as an auto-incrementing id. The transformation CTX parameter indexes the bookmark state per source, enabling the job to resume from where it left off. The developer must call job.init at the start and job.commit at the end. Glue crawlers detect schema changes and new partitions in S3, but do not track individual rows in JDBC sources. Pushed-on predicates filter data during reads, but require manual management of the last processed value in an external store. Reading the entire table and filtering afterward wastes compute resources by processing 500 million rows when only new rows are needed. Question 19. Litware Analytics has a data lake on Amazon S3 with hundreds of tables. A data engineer needs to grant a new team of 15 data scientists access to 40 tables across 8 databases. The tables span multiple business domains. The data engineer wants to minimize the number of permission operations and ensure that new tables added to these databases automatically inherit the correct permissions. Which approach should the data engineer use? Select one, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. LFDAG's tag-based access control in lake formation provide the most scalable approach. By assigning LFDAGs to databases and tables, new tables automatically inherit tags from their parent database, eliminating the need to grant permissions on each new table individually. With the named resource method, the data engineer would need approximately 600 individual grants, 15 scientists times 40 tables, whereas LFDAGs require only the tag assignments plus tag-based grants, scaling linearly rather than multiplicatively. IAM policies and S3 bucket policies do not provide the fine-grained table-level governance that lake formation offers, and they require constant updates as tables are added. Question 20. Litware Commerce has an AWS Glue ETL job that processes incremental order data from an Amazon S3 data lake. The job runs hourly and should only process files that arrived since the last successful run. The data engineer enabled job bookmarks, but the job is reprocessing all files on every run. Which combination of issues could cause this behavior? Select 2, review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A and option B. Oz Glue job bookmarks require both job.init at the start and job.commit at the end of the script to properly initialize and persist bookmark state. Without these calls, the bookmark state is never saved, causing the job to reprocess all data on each run. Additionally, the transformation CTX parameter is essential because it indexes the bookmark state per data source. Without it, the bookmark cannot track which specific data source has been processed. Paused mode actually processes new data but does not update the bookmark state, which is a different behavior than reprocessing everything. While overwritten files could cause issues, S3 bookmarks track object timestamps and would still detect changes. Glue data catalog write permissions are not required for bookmark functionality since bookmarks use a separate internal state storage mechanism. That is the end of practice exam number 12. Review the questions you missed, then come back for the next batch.